So this is entitled Enhancing Support, Inclusion, and Access for Neurodiverse College Students. So my name is Laura Cunningham. I am finishing up my doctorate here at eTown in the SGPS side. And so this is part of my research for that doctorate. So at this point, we're going to go over learning objectives. So learning objectives for today are to gain a general understanding of neurodiversity and how neurodiversity typically presents in higher education. And then also we're going to learn strategies to increase inclusion, access, and academic performance for neurodiverse students in higher education. So this PowerPoint incorporates all aspects recommended in the literature to increase inclusivity and access for neurodiverse students, as well as other disabilities. So I will point out some of the suggestions later on in this presentation. If you see the SGPS sign here, the logo, that means that that slide is specific to SGPS. All right, so the framework for my training is four main parts. So first and foremost, it is research and evidence-based. But I do want to bracket my bias. So I am an occupational therapist by trade. So I am coming in this with an occupational therapy lens. I do have ADHD myself. And so I'm also a student at eTown College. So I did my undergrad, my grad, and now my doctorate at eTown. So I do feel like I'm coming in with a different perspective than most. However, everything that I'm presenting today is evidence-based. The next piece to it is the needs assessment. So I completed a needs assessment for this over the summer. I met with 11 different faculty with 16 different sessions, and I was trying to figure out, is there a need for this study? Do we need this training? What would it look like? So I did create different trainings for different schools. So the SGPS, you guys have your own training. And I also use student survey results from just the SGPS side of the school. I also am doing this on the traditional side of the school with various departments, and each one of them has a training specific to their needs. So you can see here, there is a flyer here that I use. So I did do a survey for the SGPS students that are considered neurodiverse. I had 14 different students fill out the survey, and so some of those results were included in this training. Okay, so what is neurodiversity? So neurodiversity is defined differently depending on where you're looking. The term neurodiversity came out of the late 1980s and the early 1990s. There was three autistic individuals, and they started the Autism Network International. So this was an online forum, a place for autistic individuals to meet and to chat. They did conferences and things along those lines. Fast forward to 1996, a woman named Judy Singer, she published her thesis onto their online platform. And I'm going to make sure it's titled correctly. It was entitled, "Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Her Life?" So in there, she talked about neurodiversity, talked about being an autistic individual. She talked about that she didn't feel that neurodiversity was a disability. And then a gentleman named Harvey Bloom then read her thesis and ended up posting a follow-up to it. And then the New York Times picked it up, and then he published all of that information into the New York Times. And that is actually where the term neurodiverse came from historically. So it was historically created for individuals with autism. However, now it is branched out. So at this point, for today's training, I'm going to define neurodiversity as those with autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and anyone with a learning disability. It is important to note, though, that there are other diagnoses that do identify as neurodiverse. A common one is executive functioning disorder, anxiety disorder, Tourette syndrome, traumatic brain injuries. There's a whole handful. Okay, so some terminology to consider. So a lot of us were taught, I know I was taught in college, to always use person-first terminology. However, research shows that individuals with autism actually prefer to be identified as autistic. So going forward, I will be using that terminology. The other piece to consider is disability versus disorder versus difference. There is a big shift right now in whether it's online platforms, research, podcasts, all those different pieces where individuals that are neurodiverse are preferring to be labeled as different, meaning that there is a difference within their brain and not necessarily a disability. So you might have heard the term neurodiverse movement. That is really what all of that is about. So shifting away from the medical model of something is wrong with me that needs to be fixed, I have a disability or a disorder, and shifting really into this idea that we have a difference in the way our brain is functioning. The other piece to consider for terminology is the term ableism. So this is a form of discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities. So this could be unconscious or conscious. And it really comes down to whether you have an unconscious bias, different types of stereotypes. A common one I saw in the literature was the stereotype that autistic individuals had intellectual disabilities, and that's quite the opposite. 46 to 52% of individuals with autism are at the above or average intelligence. So it's just important to make sure we're taking a second and recognizing some of the different biases that we have. All right, so the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities as they relate in higher education. So autism, in order to be diagnosed, most of you know this, we need to have restricted or repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities. And we also need to have persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. So when you take that and you apply it to higher education, on this slide are some of the main challenges research is showing for autistic students in higher education. Now, for these slides, when I'm talking about higher education, it can be undergraduate or graduate school. A lot of the research is not separating them out. So some common challenges with autism are going to be challenges with social interaction and cues. So their ability to recognize the tone in someone's voice, recognizing different nonverbal skills. So whether it's eye contact, when to initiate or maintain social conversations or communications. There could be some bluntness to some of the comments that they're making, or maybe the emails they're interacting with you. There can be some challenges in terms of understanding social norms. Executive functioning skills, which we're going to go over later today, but this is going to be things like time management, attention, working memory, inhibitory control, all those different pieces. And then a lot of research is showing an increase in anxiety and mental health, and sensory sensitivities and defensiveness, which we are going to go over in a second. The other piece to this that's really important to understand is that there are strengths too with individuals that have autism. Right now, a lot of what I'm reading is about visual spatial processing, being highly creative, having almost savant-like recall skills or rote verbal skills, as well as a really strong internal drive or motivation. So that's some of the strengths that I'm seeing in the literature. The other piece to consider is that the prevalence of autism is on the rise. So in 2000, 1 in 150 individuals between the ages of 3 and 17 were diagnosed with autism. And fast forward to 2020, it's now 1 in 36. So we are going to continue to see a prevalence in neurodiverse students at the college, as well as autism within that area. ADHD in higher education. So in order to be diagnosed with ADHD, you need to have persistent patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and or impulsivity. There's 3 different types of ADHD: hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive type, and a combined type. The ADD is no more. So what they did is they separated out ADHD into these 3 types. So hyperactive and impulsive, that would be what the old ADD would look like. Trouble sitting still, fidgeting, having a hard time with paying attention, those types of pieces. Inattentive type is going to be more of a student that's more disorganized, has a hard time with time management, prioritization, attention, and motivation. Those pieces are all going to come into play as well. Right now, statistics are showing us that 1 in 20 college students have ADHD. And 4 out of every 10 individuals with ADHD in college also have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. We know that they are the least likely to graduate college out of all 3 of the diagnoses. So out of autism and learning disabilities, ADHD is the least likely to graduate. Some challenges for ADHD in higher education are listed here. So it could be group work. That is probably out of all the surveys for both the traditional side of the college and SGPS, that is pretty consistent in most of the comments in terms of the greatest challenge they're having. It has to do with group work and social communication, relationships as well, executive functioning again, anxiety and mental health, and sensory sensitivities and defensiveness. In the next slide here, we're going to talk about just dyslexia. Learning disorders can be those disorders including, excuse me, including dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. Some of the research also includes auditory and visual processing delays in there as well. But since 1 out of every 5 college students has dyslexia, we're going to focus on simply dyslexia today. So you can see here, there's 2 pictures showing what someone with dyslexia typically sees when they're reading. It's important to note that no dyslexia presents the same. So maybe some people might see some letters flipped, or maybe they see in this situation, there are O's instead of E's. You might see P's instead of Q's, those types of pieces. And on the blue picture here, you can see that some of the words look like they're moving, or they look like they're squished together. Some of them almost look like they're popping out of the page. So those are all different commonalities in terms of what individuals with dyslexia are reading, which then takes you into the challenges then with information processing. So it's going to take, on average, a college student with dyslexia 2 to 3 times longer to read than a college student without dyslexia. And it takes them on average 4 to 5 times longer to do a paper and 3 to 4 times longer to do any other assignment outside of a paper. So it takes individuals with dyslexia a significantly a longer amount of time to do what is required outside of the classroom. A lot of our students are going to have a harder time with reading handwritten feedback, reading out loud. They're going to require extra time for quizzes, those types of pieces. And we're going to talk about a little later some of the difficulties with certain fonts and colors. A lot of our students with dyslexia are using screen readers. Same with ADHD as well. So having a screen reader can be really helpful in terms of helping with the information processing. And so we will be going over those too. Okay, so these next couple of slides are the results from the survey that I did for the SGPS side of the school. We had a total, like I said, a sample size of 14 students. So you can see here 16% with autism, 55% with ADHD, 11% with dyslexia, 5% with dyscalculia, and other. And I defined other as a combination of those diagnoses. So maybe ADHD with let me think, ADHD with dyslexia or with anxiety disorder, something along those lines. So that is what is considered other. And then here the question was, have you received any accommodations for your neurodiversity? So you can see here that 53% of what happened? All right, 53% of students feel that they do not have accommodations, but they would probably benefit from them. 23% say yes. And what's important to note is on the survey at the very end, if they chose that in this question that they needed accommodations, I did give them the information for them to go get that. Next, you can see here, the next question was, do you feel included as a neurodiverse student? So you can see 70% said that they feel included both in the classroom and on the campus, which is amazing. 0% say they only feel included on the campus. 10% said they feel included in the classroom. And 20% said they do not feel included in the classroom or on the campus. So when I looked at some of the qualitative data regarding why students don't feel included in the classroom or on the campus, again, it has to do with if there's any group work, and there was commonality in terms of lack of inclusive or accessible materials. Okay. So going from here, what I did is I had a qualitative piece to this as well. And so some of the quotes you're going to see are from students directly, but there was a couple common themes. One of the other overarching themes is that the students at SGPS, they feel very supported by you guys. They feel faculty are willing to help when they ask for things like extensions or follow-up information. That is very consistent across all the surveys, that they do feel supported and that you are all very willing to help them reach whatever their goal is. There were some student challenges with information processing. So there's some quotes here. So a lot of them had to do with not understanding assignments completely, not understanding what was required in terms of grading rubrics. So this one here talks about not understanding assignments. This has made it difficult to complete the assignment, which then caused me to become overwhelmed and frustrated to a point of feeling like I'm not smart or good enough. And then the next one talks about making sure materials are accessible. So many of the professors use downloadable document types, which work well with audio reading tools on my PC, but not all materials are accessible or in the right order. I'm going to explain what that means later. This is so frustrating when the documents are the right type. This is a great help for my pacing and comprehension since I can both read and hear the content simultaneously. The next survey theme was about student challenges with time. So the students that said that they didn't have accommodations, but they felt that they needed time, or they felt they needed accommodations, had a lot to do with time. So this one here, some professors would offer a predicted amount of time for assignments. For example, read this article and answer A, B, C questions. And then this professor is saying it might take on average 60 minutes. Well, again, going back to it's going to take them 2 to 3 times longer with dyslexia to read. The student said, I inevitably would go over the predicted amount of time, usually taking about twice as long as the professor seemed to think an assignment should take. So I would try to budget my time and would end up feeling defeated. The next one was about barriers to disclosure. What's really interesting to note here is that this was the complete opposite on the traditional side of the college. So the traditional side of the college talked about that they felt that there was less stigma, that they felt that they were more willing to share. Whereas on the SGPS side, they did talk about barriers to disclosure. And a lot of the qualitative pieces talked about the negative stigmas they've experienced in the workplace and the assumption that they would also experience that here. So this quote, in most educational and professional environments, neurodiversity carries negative stigmas. As a result, disclosure and open identification as neurodiverse are extremely sensitive and too often avoided by those who could benefit from reasonable accommodation. I would love to see neurodiverse alternatives more frequently and publicly advertised or presented. Individuals may not be willing to openly seek out disclosure, and identification may be willing to passively identify and review accommodation options. So this was another trend I saw where they felt that if there was more publication in terms of what is available, what types of inclusive materials, what types of training staff are receiving, that they would be more apt to disclose. Okay, so now we're going to shift more into suggestions and strategies. So this slide here is really just going over the framework I used in terms of creating these strategies. So I wanted to make sure they're evidence-based, they had high quality, high value education. I did pull my OT lens and there's a model called the PEO model in OT. And this is the idea that in order to be the highest success in terms of performance as an occupation, which here would be a student, it's important to look at the student as a person, to look at the environment in which they're working, and to look at the occupational requirements of that as a student. The other piece I looked in here was the mission statement. And then also I tried to make sure whatever strategies that I was suggesting to you, number one, I did myself. So I've been doing some of these for the last year, especially in this semester this year. Any one that I've suggested to you, I have tried. And then also I wanted them to be not only reasonable and realistic, but also ones that are going to be a little bit quicker to do. And, you guys are very busy. So I wanted to make sure they're things that are easy to do and you could do right away. The other piece to this is I did them so that no matter what student was using them, they would be beneficial to all students. So some of the suggestions are going to be the same you'll see that you would also do for someone with, say, a visual impairment. Okay. So in a lot of the literature for asynchronous learning or online learning, they talk a lot about what is called Zoom fatigue. So Zoom fatigue came out of COVID, the idea of the students being in front of the Zoom all day and all the fatigue that goes along with that. However, the terminology Zoom fatigue has really expanded, and it's really any type of online learning right now, whether it's on Zoom or not. So our students on the SGPS side would be considered, they would be within that Zoom fatigue category, even if there are no Zoom lectures. So Zoom fatigue is the idea that you need to have higher levels of cognitive and sensory demands, the challenges with having to sit in one space for long amounts of time, be staring at the screen for long amounts of time, the idea that it causes not only full body fatigue, it can cause fatigue in terms of executive functioning demands, sensory demands, social demands. And when you look at those three pieces, those are also what we saw in terms of common challenges for neurodiverse students in college. So they're already going to be having a harder time with those three pieces, the executive functioning, the social, and the sensory. And so when you put that on top of this notion of Zoom fatigue, the rates are very high for Zoom fatigue in college students that are neurodiverse. And when we have Zoom fatigue, what happens then is their sensory processing challenges go up. So they have a harder time in terms of regulating themselves, and they have a harder time in terms of paying attention. So it increases distractibility. They have a harder time with working memory, which is going to be their ability to temporarily store information and then use that information, manipulate it in their mind for short-term use. So maybe it's listening to you on a lecture and then writing down what you're saying and then continuing to listen at the same time. The other piece that is going to be challenging is cognitive flexibility. So that's going to be your ability to think about multiple concepts at once, or to switch between different concepts. And the last one is inhibitory control, which is your ability to control automatic urges. So whether they are sitting there and they hear their phone go off or a text go off, or they feel hungry. So as the demand of Zoom fatigue increases, they're going to have a harder time controlling those urges. Okay, so this slide here is talking about just general things we can do to increase access and inclusion. The first thing here is checklists for assignments or specific rubrics. This was consistent across literature, not only for neurodiverse students, but also for most students with disabilities and also students with anxiety. So the idea behind this is the more specific your write-up is for the assignments, and the more specific your rubrics are, then the better understanding the students are going to have. So I did this last semester. I went in and reframed a lot of my rubrics, made sure they were very specific, easier to follow. And I also did some checklist assignments as well. So giving them checklists for all the different components of like a bigger type of assignment. And I will say there was much less confusion, less questions. The grading ended up being less time because they all did a much better job on the actual assignment. And when I asked for some feedback on it, most of the students said it's because the assignment was easier to read and they really appreciated the checklist. Another piece to having inattentive type of ADHD is you often miss key pieces of assignments. So maybe out of 10 steps, you only see 8 of them. And so you might miss the last 2. So having a checklist for assignments also does help with that piece. Considering chunking and scaffolding of assignments. So if you have one really big assignment and it's due on week 8, try to have it so that the first part is due on week 2 and the next part is due on week 4 and so forth. And then there's the concept, of multisensory learning. So multisensory learning is proven to be effective for academic performance and retention for all students. But in online learning, it's challenging. So how do we do multisensory learning without overdoing it in terms of sensory processing? So one really good concept you can do is on your Canvas page, making sure that you have multisensory learning on there. So putting different types of supplemental videos up about content that you went over, different types of articles they can read, different websites, different things like that, where they can go to different places and get different types of content. The other thing is to really be mindful of the extra time. So like I said earlier, that was a pretty consistent result in the survey. That was on the SGPS side and the traditional side. So students feeling that they felt stressed for time in class is one, but obviously we're all asynchronous, so that is a little bit different. But also feeling mindful of how long it does take students to read, to grade. One of the common feedbacks was about discussion boards. So if the discussion board was due on Friday, a lot of students felt it was hard to turn around and have their peer review in by Sunday because it does take longer to process all that information. And another thing too was the setup discussion boards. It was visually hard for a lot of students to follow. The next one is try to minimize sensory challenges and distractions, and this includes you. So one of the common things with lectures that were recorded, or if you had Zoom lectures, or if it was just you on there and you're explaining the assignments for the class. So trying to minimize the distractions as much as you can. So what that might look like is if your cat jumps up behind you, that is a distraction. If there's people walking by, trying to make sure whatever's in the background of you is not as distracting as well. So those little pieces, they seem so simple, but they're very, very impactful for our neurodiverse students. And just remember, the less distractions and the less they have to regulate their sensory processing, then the more attention they have, and then overall their academic performance will be much improved. And the last thing here is when you are meeting with a student, the suggestion is to do it over Zoom or something where you can do active closed captioning. So in Zoom now, you can pull it up, you can have active closed captioning. You can also do it within a PowerPoint slide. So we'll go over some of those in the next couple of slides, but it's really important that if you are meeting with a student, that you do some type of recording or allow the student to do some type of recording so they can go back and re-listen to it, maybe look at the transcripts to help with some of that information processing. Okay, so this one here is going into presentations and some recommendations for those. The one thing which I'll go over in the next slide is what they call accessible templates. So within PowerPoint, you can go in PowerPoint right now. They're the only ones that do accessible templates. You can go online, and what I have here, you can open a new PowerPoint. You can go into online designs when you create your design, and you can type into the search bar there, just type in accessible templates, and a bunch of templates will come up for you that are considered accessible. So the reading order is already set up. There's something called alternative templates, which we'll talk about on the next slide. All of those pieces are actually set up for you, so you don't have to go in and make sure everything is accessible. This PowerPoint is in an accessible template from PowerPoint as well. Canva and Google Slides do not do accessible templates at this time, but when I was digging into what's going on with both of those, apparently Canva is working on making accessible templates. Colors right now, so we want to avoid any white or black backgrounds. That is great for our neurodiverse students, also those with visual challenges. We want to use off-white, gray, or light blue backgrounds with contrasting fonts for text. So if you pull up a new PowerPoint, it gives you a white background. So making sure you are changing that to these colors, whether it's off-white, gray, or light blue. Try to avoid white font as much as you can too. You want to ensure that color is not the only way you are conveying information. So you can see in the next slide, it says to avoid capitalized words or anything in italicized font. That is almost every single thing I read in terms of strategies is to avoid capitalized words and italicized fonts. Again, remembering 1 in 5 students has dyslexia, so that is extremely impactful for those students. So what we want to do is use bullet points, numbered list, and visual aids instead. The other piece you can do is space out your line. So if you have one line of text, try to add an extra space between it or make it double spaced, and that will help in terms of visually seeing what is required. And then here are the fonts that are currently recommended right now for our students with dyslexia. The recommendation is on a PowerPoint. We want it at 18-point font or larger, but the best recommended font size is 24 print on a presentation. On anything that is printed out, emails, anything on Canvas, any of those types of things, we want 12 to 14 point font as well. So there is the different fonts that they're recommending at this time. The thing too is we want to really try to avoid any motion, any moving graphics on our slides. So you can put those slides where the title will flip around. So trying to avoid any of those as well. They're visual distracting. They can really mess up an individual's sensory processing, especially if they're visually sensitive as well. So we just want to keep our slides very simple but consistent. Okay, so I am going to pull up here in PowerPoint, this is how you can check your accessibility of PowerPoint. So I'm going to pull this down. Oh, maybe. Does that work? So let me make sure you guys are seeing this screen correctly. Okay, so within PowerPoint here, what you can do is go up to where it says review. All right, so if you click review, you can click on over here where it says check accessibility. Now you can click this and it'll show everything at once, but I have found it's much easier in terms of views if you click on the little down arrow here. So if you click on here, you can see these are all the different things we can do to increase accessibility within our presentations. Alternative text is one. So if you click on alternative text and you click on a picture, over here, it tells you what it is. So this is considered alternative text. So if somebody is unable to see this, or they're having a hard time reading the picture, understanding the picture. So this one is very visually heavy. So I would expect somebody with visual processing challenges or dyslexia to have a harder time reading this. And so over here, if we have the screenshot of, it says here, screenshot of a computer, it can help as well. The other thing we can do is this thing here, generate alternative text for me, and it'll create it for you. You can also go in and just type in here a screenshot of a computer, showing accessibility, whatever you want to put. Okay. You can also mark your pictures as decorative as well. So that way our students know what exactly it is that they're looking at. The other thing that is neat is if you go to the next slide here, what I'll do is I'll show you a way to make it much, much easier for you. So if you go into insert and you go into picture, if you use any of these here, they will automatically create an alternative text for you. As long as you go in through this way through PowerPoint, this will do it for you. Now Canva and Google have this as well, but you still have to go slide by slide to make sure they're in there. So you can even go on here, you can save something to your device itself. They have the different mobile images, but if you go here to online pictures, so you can search the same images or whatever it is you're looking for online, you can search them on here. So let's say we're going to do an airplane. Let's say this one here, and we insert it in. It'll create the alternative text for us. So if we go back, alternative text, so here it's telling you a large airplane taking off. So all you have to do is approve it, and now it's there permanently. The other thing we can do here is if we go back here, we can go into, again, review, accessibility, and we have reading order. So earlier when we were looking at the surveys, this is one of the common themes they were talking about is the reading order. So you can see over here, it talks to you about the different reading orders of what they should look like. So if I click on one, it's going to read to them strategies and suggestions first. Second, it'll read this. It'll go through the pictures. And then down here, it'll just keep going. So if you do not use an accessible template, this will be completely out of order. So you need to make sure that you're checking over here, and you can move these up or down to make it easier for you so the students are able to watch your PowerPoint or watch your lecture or whatever it is and follow along based on the screen reader as well. So that way it's, again, that multisensory learning. For screen readers for the college, what they're recommending right now, and when I went through and did some research in terms of what students are using, the screen readers they're using, you have to have everything in PDF. If it is a Word document, they cannot use a screen reader on it. Or if it's a Google Doc, they have to convert it into PDF unless they have a special screen reader that does those pieces. So maybe they have one that will read Google Docs. But what the college is recommending right now, the type of screen readers, you need to convert everything into PDF. So I'll be honest, when I saw that, I thought to myself, well, why can't the students do that? Take some responsibility. However, if a student has that severe of dyslexia, they're actually unable to do that, or it's going to take them twice as long. Also, screen readers are mandated as an accommodation, obviously for visual impairments as well. So if we have any students along those lines, we have to put them in PDF. So it's a good habit to get into. Anything you're uploading to Canvas, make sure you're converting into a PDF. We're giving that option so that students can use them for screen readers. The other thing too is if, for example, for this, making sure we're including closed captioning, anything we're using, making sure those the transcriptions are there. It's bigger again. Switch these out. Okay. Let me go to the next. All right, so the last piece here is talking about flexible and accessible Canvas. So within Canvas, I have a meeting with ITS at the end of the semester to try and figure out a way to make Canvas so when you pull up Canvas, it's already accessible. So it is just in the correct font, the correct colors, the correct sizes. So I'm hoping that we can work with them and come up with a better solution. And the other thing is to make sure that you are reconfiguring the content layout for consistency. So I know in SGPS, they set up everything for us, but just trying to make sure however you're uploading everything, it's consistent per module. So if your modules are per weeks, making sure it is consistent throughout each one. That comes back to that information processing piece that'll make it much easier. Again, we talked about adding in required and not required content. So this can help further our knowledge and increase retention. So again, putting on Canvas onto your modules, whether it's supplemental, required, not required, something along those lines. And then adding in interactive content. So I'm going to show you this as well. Make sure you're seeing it. Okay, so interactive content. So because it's asynchronous learning, everything is online, you can actually make your PowerPoints interactive. So what you can do is go up to Insert and go over here to Comment. So one of the things that I do for the courses I have in SGPS is I will put a giant stop sign right here, and the students know that if they see a stop sign, that means there's some type of interactive component on that slide. So they'll go over here and they'll see in comments, I might put something like a question, or I might ask them some type of qualitative type of question, talk to me about this, this, and this, or what is your experience with this, something along those lines. As long as they're logged into Microsoft OneDrive, so as long as they're completely logged onto the college's network, they will be able to see each other's comments. So you can actually upload your PowerPoint as a live PowerPoint if you do it through OneDrive on Canvas. If you go through it that way, go into OneDrive, upload it that way, it'll work for the students. And again, they have to be logged in. But it's actually pretty interesting because you can see them going back and forth with comments. You can pull up the PowerPoint, see it for that. And I do feel like it's a little bit more interactive, and I'll go in there as well and talk to them about that slide. Or if I see that they are having a harder time in that slide itself, I'll go in and add some audio to it, or I'll do a specific video and upload it. So that way I know for sure that they know that content. All right, let me go back to this. Okay, and the last piece on here is making sure to send out small videos and updates via Canvas announcements. This was on the SGPS surveys. This was also on the traditional side of the surveys that students really appreciated if you did something every week. So they were talking about how some faculty will put out this is everything you guys need to do this week, even though it's laid out in the modules, that the students felt like it was almost like that checklist we talked about earlier, where they can go in and make sure they did everything that's required of them. And they were saying whether it's just written down, it's a checklist, a video, whatever it is, that was pretty consistent across both sides of the college in terms of students really appreciating that. The other piece too is making sure everything is within Canvas announcements. The other piece was they were talking about hyperlinks. So the ease of having a hyperlink within was also very helpful. And so for some of our neurodivergent students, it's helpful to just have that pop up. They can switch over the screen reader, and it is much more accessible as well. All right. Okay, and then here is my list of references. You can scan this QR code for them, or you can ask me for them. I'm more than happy to send them out. Okay, and then the next one is, if we can get there, this is, thank you. So if you could possibly, this is a faculty feedback. If you could click on this link here and then, or this QR code, I will paste this link into the chat box as well. Oops, let me get that in there. All right, so I'll get that in there for you guys. And then let me stop my share here. And I just wanted to open it up and see if anybody had any questions. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the comments. You will notice within the feedback, and I'm putting it into chats right now. The very bottom of the survey, it does talk about, there we go. It does talk about, there is a section there where if you're willing to, I am planning on doing follow-up interviews in December, maybe even into January, just to see if there was any strategies you tried, if they were helpful or not. And so we can make this as helpful and beneficial for you as possible. And I do want to continue with some of the trainings. I know on the traditional side, I have more planned as well. So if you're interested in that as well, just please feel free to put your name in there, and I will be more than happy to follow up with you in December or January. So let me make sure there's no more questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your night.